Evelyn Mercer's fingers tightened around the Winchester as dust clouds rose on the horizon. 18 riders, maybe more. They weren't coming to talk. 3 years she'd held this ranch alone since Daniel died, and now Colton Vane was finally done playing games. The cattle baron wanted her land, and he'd brought an army to take it. Then a stranger in a faded red poncho appeared at her gate, his hand resting easy on his revolver. "You got about 12 minutes before they get here," he said quietly. "You planning to fight or run?" She didn't hesitate. "Fight." He nodded once. "Good. If you want to see how Evelyn's impossible stand against an empire unfolds, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The Idaho Territory didn't forgive weakness." Evelyn Mercer had learned that the hard way, one brutal season at a time, ever since Daniel's mare came back without him 3 years ago. The horse had been lathered and wild-eyed, reins dragging through the sage, and Evelyn knew before she even found his body at the base of Copper Ridge that her life had just split cleanly into before and after. Before, she'd been a rancher's wife. After, she was alone. The ranch sat in a shallow basin where Willow Creek cut through dry grassland, 1,200 acres that Daniel had claimed with his own hands back in 1879. It wasn't much compared to the sprawling cattle empires spreading across the valley, but it was theirs. Now it was hers. The house was rough-cut pine that Daniel had milled himself, the barn leaned slightly west from winter winds, and the corrals needed constant mending because the posts rotted faster than she could replace them. Every morning, she woke to a list of problems she couldn't solve and jobs she couldn't finish, and every night she fell into bed too exhausted to dream. The town of Silverbow, 8 miles north, had opinions about her situation. "Woman's got no business running cattle alone," old Martin Shipley muttered loud enough for her to hear when she came in for supplies. "Ranch'll be dust inside 2 years. "Already is dust," his brother added, spitting tobacco into the street. "Just too stubborn to see it." Evelyn bought her flour and nails without responding, paid in cash she could barely afford, and rode home with her jaw set hard enough to crack teeth. Let them talk. She didn't need their approval. She needed fence wire and another month without disaster. But disaster had a name in the Idaho Territory, and his name was Colton Vane. Vane owned the Three Bars Ranch, 60,000 acres that stretched from the mountains to the river. More cattle than anyone could count, and enough hired guns to crush anyone who stood in his way. He'd arrived in the valley 5 years ago with Eastern money and a smile that didn't reach his eyes, buying up homesteads and squeezing out families who'd worked the land for decades. Some he bought legally, others he simply took. Daniel had refused to sell. "That land's worth 10 times what he's offering," Daniel had said, the night Vane's foreman came knocking. "He thinks we're fools." "Maybe we should take it," Evelyn had replied quietly. "Maybe it's enough to start over somewhere safer." Daniel kissed her forehead. "We don't run, Ev. Not from men like him." 6 months later, Daniel was dead, and Evelyn was alone with a choice: sell and disappear, or stay and fight an empire with nothing but stubbornness and a Winchester rifle. She stayed. Vane's men came back twice after Daniel died, first with offers, then with threats. She met them at the gate with her rifle cradled in her arms and her voice colder than January frost. "This ranch isn't for sale." "Ma'am, Mr. Vane's being generous." "I said no." The foreman, a lean man named Cutter with a scar running jaw to ear, studied her like she was an animal that didn't know it was already dead. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "Then stop coming back." He smiled without warmth. "We'll see how long that lasts." They poisoned her well 2 weeks later. Evelyn spent 4 days hauling water from the creek in buckets until she could dig a new one, her hands blistering and bleeding, her back screaming. When she finally struck clean water again, she sat in the mud and cried for the first time since the funeral. Not from sadness, but from pure exhausted rage. She started sleeping with the rifle beside the bed after that. The valley whispered that Evelyn Mercer was crazy, touched in the head, too stubborn to see reason. Fine. Let them whisper. She had cattle to feed and fences to mend, and if she stopped moving for even 1 day, the whole thing would collapse around her. Summer came hard that year, the kind of heat that baked the ground to iron and turned the grass brittle as old bones. Evelyn worked from dawn until dark, riding fence lines, checking water sources, watching for signs of trouble. The cattle were restless, sensing something she couldn't name, and twice she found tracks near the northern pasture that didn't belong to her stock. Someone was watching. She reported it to Sheriff Talbot in Silverbow, a soft-bellied man who owed his position to Vane's money, and everyone knew it. "Tracks don't mean much, Ms. Mercer," he said, not bothering to look up from his desk. "Could be drifters, could be nothing. Could be Vane's men scouting my land." Talbot finally met her eyes, his expression flat. "You got proof of that?" "I've got instinct." "Instinct don't hold up in court." Evelyn leaned across his desk. "You going to do your job, or do I handle this myself?" Talbot's face reddened. "You threatening me?" "I'm asking if the law still exists in Silverbow, or if Colton Vane bought that too." She left before he could answer, knowing she'd just made another enemy she couldn't afford. July bled into August. The heat didn't break. Evelyn's hands grew calloused and scarred, her skin burned dark from the sun, and her eyes developed the hard edge of someone who expected trouble every time the wind changed. She stopped going to town except when absolutely necessary. People stared, women whispered. Men looked at her like she was a problem they didn't know how to solve. One afternoon, she found another homestead abandoned, the Carsons' place east of her property. The house was empty, windows dark, livestock gone. A note nailed to the door read, "Sold to 3 Bars Ranch." That made 7 families in 2 years. Evelyn rode home slowly, feeling the valley closing in around her like a fist. That night she couldn't sleep. She sat on the porch with her rifle across her knees, watching the stars wheel overhead and listening to the cattle low in the distance. Somewhere out there, Vane was planning his next move. She could feel it the way animals sense storms coming. "Daniel," she whispered into the darkness, "I don't know how much longer I can do this." The night didn't answer. When dawn finally came, she forced herself up, made coffee strong enough to strip paint, and headed out to check the southern fence line. Halfway there, she saw them. Dust on the horizon. Riders. Too many to count. Evelyn's heart kicked hard against her ribs. She wheeled her horse around and rode flat out for the ranch, her mind already racing through impossible calculations. How many guns did she have? 2 rifles, 1 shotgun, her revolver. How much ammunition? Maybe 300 rounds if she'd counted right last time. How many places could she fortify? The barn had good sight lines. The house had thick walls. How long could one woman hold off an army? Not long, but maybe long enough. She was 100 yards from the barn when she saw the stranger. He sat easy on a rangy buckskin horse just outside her gate, wearing a dusty black hat and a faded red poncho that had seen better years. His face was weathered, hard-planed, with eyes the color of winter smoke. A revolver rode low on his hip, the holster worn smooth from use, and he held himself with the stillness of someone who'd spent a lot of time waiting for violence. Evelyn reined in hard, her hand dropping instinctively to her rifle. "This is private property." The stranger tilted his head slightly, studying her with an expression she couldn't read. "You got company coming." His voice was rough, quiet, the kind of voice that didn't waste words. 18 riders, maybe more. They'll be here in about 12 minutes. Evelyn's blood turned to ice. "Who are you?" "Name's Silas Reed." He nodded toward the dust cloud growing larger on the horizon. "Those Vane's men?" "How do you know about Vane?" "Heard talk in Silverbow. Heard you've been holding out against him for 3 years. Silas shifted slightly in his saddle. "Heard he's done being patient." Evelyn's mind spun. 12 minutes, 18 men. She looked at the stranger, this Silas Reed, and made a decision that was either the smartest or stupidest thing she'd ever done. "You planning to help or just watch?" Something flickered in Silas's gray eyes. Not quite a smile. "Depends. You planning to fight or run?" "Fight." He nodded once, slow and deliberate. "Good." He swung down from his horse in one fluid motion. "Then we better get moving." They had 12 minutes to turn a ranch into a fortress. Evelyn hit the ground running, her boots pounding across the packed dirt as she shouted instructions. "Barn loft, best sight lines. I'll take position there. You hold the gate." Silas didn't argue. He moved like a man who'd done this before, checking angles, measuring distances, his hands quick and certain. "You got extra rifles?" "2 in the house. Ammunition's in the chest by the door." "Water?" "Barrel behind the barn." Good. Silas glanced at the approaching dust cloud. Closer now, close enough to see individual riders. They come in hard, or do they talk first? Vane likes to talk, makes him feel civilized. Then we let him talk. Silas's voice was flat, cold. But the second he reaches for a gun, we end it. Evelyn ran to the house, grabbed the extra rifles and every box of ammunition she could carry, then sprinted to the barn. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from adrenaline so sharp it felt like lightning in her veins. She climbed the ladder to the loft, positioned herself behind a stack of hay bales, and laid out her ammunition in neat rows. From here she could see everything. The gate, the yard, the road stretching north toward town. Silas took position near the gate, partially hidden behind a water trough, his rifle resting easy across his knees. He looked calm. Too calm. Like this was just another Tuesday. "You done this before?" Evelyn called down. "Once or twice. You always show up 12 minutes before a fight? Only when it matters." The riders came into view. 18 men, just like Silas said. They rode in a loose formation, confident and unhurried, the kind of men who'd done this enough times to know how it usually ended. At the front rode Cutter, Vane's foreman, his scarred face set hard. Beside him was a man Evelyn recognized instantly, Colton Vane himself. Vane was tall, well-dressed even on horseback, with pale eyes and a smile that made her skin crawl. He looked like a banker. He killed like a rattlesnake. The riders stopped 20 yards from the gate. "Evelyn Mercer," Vane's voice carried easily across the yard, smooth and reasonable. "I think it's time we had a conversation." Evelyn stayed hidden in the loft, her rifle trained on Vane's chest. "I've got nothing to say to you." "That's a shame." Vane spread his hands in a gesture of false goodwill. "I've been more than patient, more than fair. But patience has limits, Mrs. Mercer. So does tolerance for land thieves." Vane's smile thinned. Strong words from a woman alone. "She's not alone." Silas's voice cut through the tension like a blade. He stepped into view, his rifle held loose and ready, his gray eyes locked on Vane. The 18 riders shifted in their saddles, hands drifting toward weapons. Vane studied Silas with cold interest. "And who might you be?" "Nobody you need to know." "You're making a mistake, friend." "I've made worse." Cutter leaned forward, his hand resting on his revolver. "Mr. Vane's making a generous offer. This doesn't have to get ugly." Silas didn't move. "Seems to me bringing 18 armed men to a woman's ranch already is ugly." Evelyn felt something shift in her chest. Gratitude, maybe, or relief that for the first time in 3 years she wasn't facing this alone. She kept her rifle steady, her voice hard. "You've got 10 seconds to leave my property, Vane." Vane's expression didn't change, but something dark flickered behind his eyes. "You're a fool, Evelyn. This ranch is worth nothing without water, and I control every creek from here to the mountains. You'll be dust by winter. Then I'll be dust on my own land. You'll be dead on your own land." Silas took one step forward. "She said 10 seconds. You're down to 5. The air went electric. 18 men against 2. The math was brutal. Evelyn's finger rested lightly on the trigger, her breath steady despite the hammering of her heart. She could see Cutter's hand tightening on his gun, could see the riders calculating odds, could see Vane's smile turning into something colder and meaner. "This isn't over," Vane said quietly. "No," Silas agreed. "It's not." Vane pulled his horse around with a vicious jerk of the reins. "You've made your choice, Mrs. Mercer. Live with it while you can." The riders turned and rode north, slow and deliberate, dust rising behind them like a promise. Evelyn didn't lower her rifle until they disappeared over the ridge. Then she climbed down from the loft on legs that suddenly felt like water, crossed the yard, and stopped in front of Silas Reed. He was already reloading his rifle with calm, practiced movements. "Why?" she asked. Silas didn't look up. "Why what?" "Why help me? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." He finished loading, slung the rifle over his shoulder, and finally met her eyes. "I've seen what happens when men like Vane get what they want. Figured it was time somebody said no." Evelyn studied him, this stranger who'd appeared out of nowhere with 12 minutes to spare, this quiet gunman who'd stood beside her when the whole valley had turned its back. "They'll come back," she said. "I know." Probably tonight. Probably. You planning to stay? Silas looked toward the horizon where the dust was still settling, then back at the ranch, the leaning barn, the worn house, the land Daniel had died protecting. Yeah, he said quietly. I'm planning to stay. Evelyn nodded once, her throat tight. Then we better get ready. They worked through the afternoon, turning the ranch into something defensible. Silas moved with the efficiency of a man who'd fortified positions before, checking angles, reinforcing weak points, setting up fallback positions. Evelyn showed him the map she'd been drawing for 3 years. Every ridge, every draw, every place an attacker might use for cover. You've been planning this, Silas said, studying the map, since the day they poisoned my well. Smart, desperate, same thing sometimes. As the sun dropped toward the mountains, painting the sky orange and red, they took stock. 4 rifles, 2 shotguns, 3 revolvers, enough ammunition for a serious fight, but not a long one. Water, food, fallback positions if the barn became untenable. Evelyn made coffee while Silas checked the perimeter one more time. When he came back, she handed him a tin cup and they sat on the porch steps, watching the valley darken. You don't talk much, Evelyn observed. Don't have much to say. Where'd you learn to fight like this? Silas sipped his coffee, his eyes distant. Here and there. Places that don't exist anymore. You a soldier? Was, long time ago. Which war? All of them. Evelyn didn't push. She understood silence, understood the kind of past a person didn't want to talk about. Daniel would have liked you, she said after a while. Your husband? Yeah, he believed in standing up to bullies. Got him killed. Silas set down his cup. Maybe. Or maybe he just believes some things are worth dying for. Are they? Don't know. Never found one yet. Then why stay? Silas was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the darkening horizon. Because running gets old, and because sometimes you see something worth defending even if it's not yours. Evelyn felt something loosen in her chest, a knot she'd been carrying for 3 years, the weight of fighting alone, the crushing isolation of being the only one who believed this mattered. Thank you, she said softly. Silas nodded. Don't thank me yet. Night's not over. They took turns on watch, 2-hour shifts, rifles loaded and ready. The ranch settled into darkness, the only sounds the restless shifting of cattle and the wind moving through the dry grass. Evelyn tried to sleep but couldn't, her mind too wired, her body too ready for violence. Around midnight, the dog started barking. Evelyn was up instantly, rifle in hand, heart slamming. She met Silas at the door. Riders? She whispered. Don't know yet. Could be animals. Could be vain. They moved to their positions. Evelyn to the loft, Silas to the gate, and waited in the crushing silence. Minutes crawled past. The dogs kept barking, frantic now, and then suddenly stopped. That was worse. Evelyn scanned the darkness through the gaps in the barn wall, her finger resting on the trigger, every nerve screaming. Nothing, no movement, no sound. Then a single gunshot cracked the night. It came from the north pasture, distant but unmistakable. Evelyn's stomach dropped. The cattle. They were going after the cattle. Silas! I hear it. Another shot. Then 3 more in rapid succession. The cattle bellowed, panicked, and suddenly the night erupted with the thunder of hooves. Stampede. Evelyn ran for her horse, Silas right behind her. They rode hard toward the sound, the darkness making every step treacherous. And when they crested the rise, they saw them, 6 riders driving her cattle north, firing guns into the air, pushing the herd toward 3 Bars land. Rustlers, Evelyn spat. Vane sent rustlers. Silas didn't answer. He just spurred his horse forward, raising his rifle. The next hour was chaos. Evelyn and Silas rode into the stampede, firing warning shots, trying to turn the herd back south. The rustlers scattered but didn't retreat, circling like wolves, taking shots when they could. A bullet hissed past Evelyn's ear. Another kicked up dirt inches from her horse's hooves. Silas dropped 1 rustler from his saddle with a single clean shot, then another. The rest broke and ran. By the time the sun rose, they'd recovered most of the cattle, but the damage was done. 2 steers dead, 5 missing, fences trampled. and Evelyn's exhaustion had reached the point where her hands shook so badly she could barely hold the reins. They rode back to the ranch in silence. "This is how he does it," Evelyn said finally, her voice raw. "He doesn't come at you head on. He bleeds you, steals your stock, poisons your water, wears you down until you've got nothing left. Then we hit back." Evelyn looked at him. "How?" Silas's gray eyes were cold and hard. "We make him bleed too." Making Colton Vane bleed turned out to be more complicated than Evelyn had imagined. For 2 days after the rustler attack, she and Silas worked in tense silence, repairing fences and moving the cattle to pastures closer to the house where they could watch them. Every sound made her jump. Every shadow could be another attack. Her body ran on coffee and adrenaline, and she knew it couldn't last. On the third morning, Silas rode out before dawn without telling her where he was going. Evelyn stood in the yard, watching him disappear into the gray light, frustration burning in her chest. She didn't need mysterious, she needed answers. He came back 6 hours later, covered in trail dust, his expression unreadable. "Where the hell were you?" Evelyn demanded, meeting him at the gate. Silas swung down from his horse. "Silverbow." "Doing what?" "Asking questions." He pulled a folded piece of paper from his coat and handed it to her. "Found this at the land office." Evelyn unfolded it, her hands trembling slightly. It was a surveyor's map showing property boundaries in the valley, but the lines didn't match what she knew. According to this map, her northern pasture, the same land Daniel had legally claimed 6 years ago, was marked as part of 3 Bars Ranch. Her blood went cold. "This is wrong." "I know, but it's on file." "Official record." Vane changed it. He bribed someone. "Probably, but proving it's different than knowing it." Silas leaned against the fence rail, his gray eyes steady on hers. "That's how he's been doing it. He doesn't just take land, he makes it legal, changes maps, files false claims. By the time families figure it out, they're fighting the law instead of just Vane." Evelyn felt sick. Daniel never saw this. He didn't know. Most don't until it's too late. She looked at the map again, rage building like a wildfire in her chest. 3 years she'd been fighting, and all this time Vane had been stealing her land on paper, making her fight look like trespassing on his property instead of defending her own. "What else did you find?" "Talked to the county clerk. Man named Parsons. He's scared, but he's not completely bought. Said Vane's been filing amended claims every few months, pushing boundaries, swallowing homesteads piece by piece. Nobody challenges him because nobody wants to end up like the Hendersons." Evelyn knew that story. The Hendersons had fought Vane in court 2 years ago. Their house burned down a week before the trial. Nobody was ever charged. "So what do we do?" Her voice came out harder than she intended. "We can't fight paper with bullets." "No, but we can fight it with better paper." Silas straightened, his expression thoughtful. "The Territorial Land Office in Boise keeps original claims, master records. If Daniel's original filing is there, it supersedes anything Vane changed locally. Boise's 3 days' ride. 4 if you're careful." Evelyn stared at him. "You're saying I should leave, right now, with Vane circling. I'm saying you should go get the proof you need to bury him legally. I'll stay here and make sure the ranch is still standing when you get back." "You'll stay here alone." "Won't be the first time." Evelyn wanted to argue, but the logic was brutal and clear. She couldn't win this fight with just a rifle. She needed law on her side, real law, not Vane's corrupted version. And if Silas could hold the ranch for 4 days, "You don't know anything about ranching," she said. "I know how to shoot. That's what matters right now. The cattle will be fine. I'll keep them close and keep watch. That's it, nothing fancy." Evelyn looked at the map again, then at the ranch spreading out behind her, the land Daniel died for, the land she'd bled to protect. This was the only way to truly secure it, but leaving felt like surrender, like running when she'd sworn never to run again. "If Vane attacks while I'm gone, then I'll handle it. Silas, 18 men. I know the odds." His voice was quiet, but absolutely certain. "Go to Boise. Get the proof. I'll be here when you get back." She wanted to trust him. She barely knew him. He was a drifter who'd shown up 12 minutes before a battle and stayed for reasons he wouldn't explain. But when she looked into his gray eyes, she saw something Daniel used to have. That stubborn refusal to back down even when the smart move was retreat. "All right," she said finally. I'll leave at first light. Leave now. You'll gain 6 hours. Evelyn's chest tightened. Now? The longer you wait, the more time Vane has to figure out what we're doing. Surprise is the only advantage you've got. He was right. She hated that he was right. 20 minutes later, Evelyn was packed. Spare clothes, ammunition, Daniel's original claim documents, and enough cash to bribe whoever needed bribing in Boise. She saddled her best horse, a tough roan mare named Bridget, who could cover distance without complaining, and tied her bedroll behind the saddle. Silas handed her a canteen he'd refilled. Stay off main roads when you can. Vane's got men everywhere. I know this valley. I'm not worried about the valley. I'm worried about the 50 miles past it. He paused, then pulled a folded paper from his pocket. If you run into trouble, there's a man in Blackwood Station named Curtis Vale. Show him this. He'll help. Evelyn took the paper without opening it. Friend of yours? Used to be. That mean he's reliable? Means he owes me. She tucked the paper into her jacket. Anything else I should know? Silas looked at her for a long moment, his weathered face unreadable. Yeah, don't get killed. I didn't ride all this way just to watch this place fall apart. Despite everything, Evelyn almost smiled. I'll try. She swung into the saddle, took one last look at the ranch, her barn, her house, her land, and rode north without looking back. If she looked back, she might not leave. The ride to Boise was hard and lonely. Evelyn pushed through the afternoon heat, skirting Silverbow by taking the old mining trail that cut through the hills east of town. Twice she saw riders in the distance and detoured into the pines until they passed. Vane's men, or just cowboys, she couldn't tell, but she wasn't taking chances. She made camp that night in a stand of cottonwoods near a creek, built a small fire just long enough to make coffee, then doused it and slept with her rifle across her chest. Every sound jerked her awake. An owl, a coyote, branches cracking in the wind. The sky above was vast and indifferent, stars scattered like broken glass. She thought about Silas alone at the ranch and wondered if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life. The next day she pushed harder, covering 30 miles before the sun started dropping. Her back ached. Her legs were numb. Bridget was starting to tire, so Evelyn stopped early at a way station called Dry Fork, paid for a stall and a meal, and tried not to think about what could be happening back home. The station keeper was an old man named Fletcher, with one milky eye and hands gnarled by arthritis. He served her beans and cornbread in silence, but when she asked about the road ahead, he leaned in close. You ain't from around here. Just passing through. Passing through to where? Evelyn hesitated. North. Fletcher grunted. 3 Bars Ranch got people watching the North Road. Been that way for weeks. You got business with them? No. Then you might want to go around, unless you're looking for trouble. How far around? 10 miles east, then cut back north through the timber. Adds a day, but keeps you clear. Evelyn's jaw tightened. Even here, 2 days from her ranch, Vane's shadow reached. Thanks for the warning. Fletcher nodded slowly. Don't know what you're running from, girl, but be careful. Men like Vane don't forget. She left before dawn, following Fletcher's route through dense timber that slowed her pace but kept her hidden. The forest was cool and quiet, broken only by the sound of Bridget's hooves on soft earth and the occasional cry of a hawk overhead. Evelyn's mind churned through worst-case scenarios. Vane attacking the ranch, Silas outnumbered, the barn burning, cattle scattered, everything she'd fought for reduced to ash. Stop it, she told herself. Silas knew what he was doing. He'd held ground before. She had to trust that. But trust was hard when you'd spent 3 years learning that people failed you. She reached Blackwood Station late on the 3rd day, a rough collection of buildings clustered around a crossroads where freight wagons stopped to change teams. The place smelled like horse sweat and coal smoke, and the men loitering near the saloon watched her with the kind of interest that made her hand drift toward her rifle. Evelyn found the livery stable and asked for Curtis Vale. The stable hand, a teenager with a crooked nose, eyed her suspiciously. What you want with Curtis? That's between me and him. He don't like strangers. Then it's a good thing I'm not staying. Evelyn pulled out the folded paper Silas had given her and held it up. Tell him Silas Reed sent me. The kid's expression changed. Surprise, maybe fear. Wait here. He disappeared into the back of the stable. Evelyn waited, every nerve screaming at her to get back on the road, to keep moving. She was too exposed here, too visible. 5 minutes later, a man emerged from the shadows. He was broad-shouldered and bearded, maybe 40, with a knife scar running down his left forearm and eyes that had seen too much. He looked at Evelyn, then at the paper in her hand. "Silas sent you." "That's right." Curtis took the paper, unfolded it, read whatever was written there, and handed it back without expression. "What do you need?" "Safe passage to Boise, and maybe a fresh horse if you've got one to spare." Silas mentioned why. "No, just said you owed him." Curtis's jaw worked for a moment, then he nodded curtly. "Yeah, I owe him." He jerked his head toward the stable. "I've got a gray gelding that'll get you to Boise. Strong legs, good wind, you can take him. I can pay. Keep your money, debt's a debt." Curtis studied her with sharp eyes. "You in trouble?" "The kind that doesn't end easy." "That's the only kind Silas ever gets involved in." Curtis walked to a stall and led out a tall gray horse with intelligent eyes. "His name's Ash. Treat him right and he'll run through fire for you." Evelyn transferred her gear to Ash's saddle while Curtis watched in silence. When she finished, she turned to him. "Why do you owe Silas?" Curtis was quiet for a long moment. "Because 5 years ago I did something stupid, and he kept me from getting hanged for it. That's all you need to know." "Is he a good man?" "I don't know if there's such a thing, but he's a man who keeps his word. That's rarer." Curtis stepped back. "Road to Boise's clear from here. You should make it by tomorrow night if you don't stop." "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Just don't waste what Silas is buying you with whatever he's doing back there." Evelyn swung into the saddle. "I won't." She rode through the night, stopping only to water Ash and let him rest for short stretches. The land flattened out as she approached Boise, the mountains falling behind, the sky opening up wide and endless. By the time the town came into view, Evelyn's exhaustion had reached the point where she could barely feel her legs. Boise was bigger than Silverbow, louder, dirtier, full of miners and freight haulers, and people who didn't give a damn about one more dusty woman on a tired horse. Evelyn found a boarding house that didn't ask questions, paid for a room, and collapsed onto the bed without bothering to remove her boots. She woke 6 hours later with her body screaming and her mind sharp with purpose. The Territorial Land Office was a squat brick building near the Capitol, staffed by a clerk with ink-stained fingers and a bureaucrat's love of forms. Evelyn waited in line for an hour, then approached the desk with Daniel's original claim documents. "I need to verify a land claim filed in 1879, Mercer Homestead, Silver Bow District." The clerk barely looked up. "Original filings are in the archive. Takes 3 days to pull records." "I don't have 3 days." "Then you should have planned better." Evelyn leaned across the desk. "A man is trying to steal my land by filing false claims in Silverbow. If I don't get proof of my original filing, I lose everything. So I'm asking you, please, to make this faster." The clerk finally looked at her, taking in her trail-worn clothes, her sunburned face, the desperation she couldn't quite hide. "Silverbow, you said?" "Yes." His expression shifted slightly. "You dealing with 3 Bars Ranch?" Evelyn's heart kicked. "You know about them?" "Everyone knows about them. They've been filing amended claims for 2 years. We've had 4 complaints, but nobody follows through because—" He stopped himself. "Because they get scared off." The clerk glanced around, then lowered his voice. "Look, I'm not supposed to do this, but if you've got original documents, I can cross-reference them against the master ledger right now. It won't be official, but it'll tell you if your claim's legitimate." "How long?" "An hour. Maybe 2. Evelyn could have kissed him. "Thank you." She waited in a cramped room that smelled like old paper and desperation, watching the clock crawl forward. Other people came and went, miners filing claims, lawyers arguing boundaries, families trying to prove ownership of land they'd worked for decades. The whole territory was one long fight over dirt and water and the right to exist. Finally, the clerk returned carrying a thick ledger and Daniel's documents. "Your husband's claim is legitimate," he said, spreading the papers on the table. "Filed May 1879, verified by territorial surveyor, registered and sealed. According to this, you own 1,200 acres from Willow Creek east to Copper Ridge, north to the county line." Evelyn's hands shook as she looked at the map. "This shows my northern pasture inside my boundary." "Correct. which means any amended claim filed in Silverbow showing that land as part of Three Bars Ranch is fraudulent. Can you give me certified copies? Something I can use in court? The clerk hesitated. That'll cost you. Certification fee, copying fee, notary. I don't care. How much? $20? It was almost everything she had left. Evelyn paid without blinking. 2 hours later, she walked out of the land office with a leather envelope containing certified maps, claim documents, and a notarized letter from the Territorial Land Office confirming the legitimacy of Daniel's original filing. It was proof. Real, legal, undeniable proof. Now she just had to get it home. The ride back was harder than the ride out. Evelyn's body was past exhaustion, running on nothing but will, and Ash was starting to tire despite his strength. She pushed through the first day, making decent time, her mind focused on one thought: get home, get home, get home. On the second day, her luck ran out. She was cutting through timber north of Blackwood Station when she heard horses behind her. Not the casual sound of travelers, the deliberate pace of men following a trail. Evelyn urged Ash into a trot, then a canter, trying to put distance between herself and whoever was back there. The horses behind her sped up. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She couldn't outrun them, not with Ash already tired from days of hard travel. She needed cover, needed terrain she could defend. Ahead, the trail cut through a narrow ravine with steep sides and thick brush. Evelyn made a split-second decision, turned Ash off the trail, and pushed into the undergrowth. She dismounted, grabbed her rifle, and positioned herself behind a fallen log where she could see the trail. 3 riders appeared a minute later. They weren't wearing Three Bars colors, but Evelyn recognized the type. Hired guns, trackers, men who made a living finding people who didn't want to be found. They stopped where she'd left the trail, studying the ground. Tracks go into the brush, one said. He was lean and sharp-featured, with a voice like gravel. Could be rabbiting, could be setting up. Only one way to find out. Evelyn's finger rested on the trigger. If they came into the brush, she'd have to shoot. 3 men. 3 shots. If she missed even once, "Hey!" a voice shouted from up the trail. The 3 riders turned. Curtis Vale rode into view on a big bay horse, a shotgun resting across his saddle. "You boys lost?" Curtis asked, his tone casual but his eyes hard. The lean rider studied him. "Just tracking somebody, not your concern. Becomes my concern when you're on my land." "This ain't your land." "Close enough." Curtis shifted slightly, and the shotgun moved with him. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to turn around and ride back wherever you came from. And if I see you around here again, we're going to have a different kind of conversation." The 3 riders exchanged glances. They were armed, and they outnumbered Curtis. But there was something about the way he sat his horse, that absolute calm of a man who'd done this before and wasn't bluffing. "We're just doing a job," the lean rider said. "Find a different one." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then the lean rider spat into the dirt and pulled his horse around. "This ain't over." "It is for today." The 3 men rode off, and Curtis waited until they were out of sight before calling into the brush. "You can come out now." Evelyn emerged slowly, rifle still ready, her whole body shaking with adrenaline. "How did you know?" "Saw them ride through Blackwood asking about a woman on a gray horse. Figured it was you." Curtis dismounted and handed her his canteen. "Drink." She did, the water cold and steadying. "Thank you." "Thanks Silas. He's the one who made me give a damn." Curtis studied her. "You get what you needed in Boise?" Evelyn patted the leather envelope tucked inside her jacket. "Everything." "Then let's get you home before more of Vane's dogs show up." Curtis rode with her for the next 6 hours, guiding her through back trails and hidden routes he'd learned from years of running freight through hostile territory. They didn't talk much, but his presence made the difference between fear and focus. As the sun started dropping, Curtis reined in. "Ranch is about 10 miles south from here. You should be clear the rest of the way." "You're not coming?" "Got my own troubles to manage. Besides, Silas doesn't need me getting in his way." Curtis touched the brim of his hat. "Good luck, Ms. Mercer. Give them hell." "I plan to." Evelyn rode the last stretch alone, her exhaustion forgotten, her mind fixed on the ranch rising out of the distance. Smoke curled from the chimney. The barn stood intact. The cattle were grazing in the near pasture. It was still standing. She rode into the yard as the last light faded, and Silas stepped out of the barn with his rifle, then lowered it when he saw her. "You made it." Evelyn dismounted, her legs nearly buckling. "You're still here." "Told you I would be." She crossed the yard and handed him the leather envelope. "Certified copies. Original claim maps. Legal proof that this land is mine and Vane's been filing fraudulent boundaries." Silas opened the envelope, studied the documents in the fading light, and nodded slowly. "This'll bury him. If we can get it in front of a judge who isn't bought, then we find one who isn't." Silas looked at her, and something in his expression shifted. Respect, maybe, or recognition. "You did good, Evelyn." She felt something break loose in her chest. 3 years of fighting alone suddenly met with 2 words of acknowledgement from someone who understood what it cost. "What happened while I was gone?" she asked. "Had some visitors. Ran them off." "How many?" "6. Came sniffing around the second night. I convinced them it wasn't worth the trouble." Evelyn looked at him, this quiet gunman who'd held her ranch against 6 men without breaking a sweat, and realized she didn't just trust him anymore. She needed him. "Silas, when this is over, let's get through this first." She nodded, too tired to argue. They walked to the house together, and for the first time in 3 years, Evelyn felt like she wasn't carrying the weight of the world alone. The next morning, they rode to Silver Bow together with the certified documents. Evelyn marched straight into Sheriff Talbot's office and dropped the envelope on his desk. "Those are certified copies from the Territorial Land Office in Boise, proving my ownership of the Mercer Ranch, including the northern pasture Colton Vane's been claiming is his. He filed fraudulent boundary amendments. That's a territorial crime." Talbot's face went pale. He opened the envelope with shaking hands, read the documents, and looked up at Evelyn with something close to panic. "Ms. Mercer, I'll need to verify." "It's already verified, notarized and sealed by the Territorial Land Office. Your job is to enforce the law, so enforce it. Mr. Vane is a prominent citizen. Mr. Vane is a land thief." Silas stepped forward, his voice cold and flat. "And you're either going to arrest him for fraud, or we're going to the Territorial Marshal in Boise and explain how the Silver Bow Sheriff refused to act on documented evidence." Talbot's hands trembled. He was caught between Vane's money and the law, and for the first time the law had teeth. I'll have to present this to the county judge." "You do that?" Evelyn leaned across the desk. "And while you're at it, you might want to think about which side of this you want to be on when it all comes down. Because it's coming down, Sheriff, with or without you." They left Talbot's office and walked into the bright morning sunlight. Men stared. Women whispered. Word was already spreading through Silver Bow like wildfire. Evelyn Mercer had legal proof, and Vane's empire was built on lies. "That felt good," Evelyn said quietly. "Don't celebrate yet. Vane's not done." "Neither am I." They rode back to the ranch together, and Evelyn knew the real war was just beginning. Vane's response came faster than Evelyn expected. They'd been back at the ranch less than 3 hours when a rider appeared on the horizon carrying a white flag tied to a rifle barrel. Silas spotted him first from the barn loft where he'd been keeping watch. "Company," he called down. Evelyn emerged from the house, squinting against the afternoon sun. The rider was alone, moving slow and deliberate, the white flag snapping in the wind. Not an attack, a message. "Stay here," Silas said, climbing down from the loft. "I'll see what he wants." "Like hell." Evelyn grabbed her rifle and followed him to the gate. The rider stopped 20 yards out. He was young, maybe 20, with nervous eyes and hands that stayed carefully visible. "I'm not armed," he called. "Mr. Vane sent me to deliver a message." "Then deliver it and get gone," Silas said. The kid swallowed hard. "Mr. Vane requests a meeting, tomorrow at noon, neutral ground. The old Miller place halfway between here and 3 bars. He'll come alone. Says he wants to discuss terms." Evelyn laughed, sharp and bitter. "Terms? I've got certified documents proving he's a fraud and a thief. What terms does he think he's got to negotiate?" "I'm just the messenger, ma'am. Tell Vane if he wants to talk, he can do it through the county judge when he's answering fraud charges." The kid shifted in his saddle, clearly uncomfortable. "He said you'd say that. He also said to tell you that if you refuse to meet, things will get worse, a lot worse. and that the law moves slow in Idaho Territory, but his men don't. Silas's expression went cold. That a threat? It's what he told me to say. The kid's voice cracked slightly. Look, I don't want trouble. I just need work and 3 bars pays. I'm delivering the message like I was told. What you do with it ain't my problem. Then you delivered it, Evelyn said. Now go. The kid wheeled his horse around and rode hard back north, kicking up dust. Evelyn watched him disappear, her mind already racing through possibilities. Vane wanting a meeting meant he was worried. The documents from Boise had rattled him, but it also meant he was planning something, and a cornered animal was always the most dangerous. You thinking about going? Silas asked. I'm thinking he's right about one thing. The law does move slow. Could be weeks before a judge looks at those documents, months before any trial. And in the meantime, Vane's got men and money and nothing to lose. So you want to hear him out? I want to look him in the eye and see what he's really afraid of. Evelyn turned to face Silas. But I'm not going alone. Wasn't planning on letting you. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Silas checked weapons, counted ammunition, mapped routes to the Miller place and back. Evelyn cooked a meal neither of them had much appetite for, her mind churning through every angle of what tomorrow might bring. Vane could be planning an ambush, could be stalling for time, could be genuinely desperate enough to negotiate, or it could be all three. That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She sat on the porch with a cup of coffee going cold in her hands, watching the stars wheel overhead. Silas joined her around midnight, settling onto the steps without speaking. You ever wonder why you do this? Evelyn asked after a while. Do what? Fight other people's battles. You could have ridden past my ranch that day, could have kept going and never looked back. Silas was quiet for a long time. Tried that once, didn't take. What happened? I was younger, dumber, rode through a town in New Mexico where a rancher named Holt was squeezing out Mexican families who'd been there since before it was even a territory. Figured it wasn't my problem. Kept riding. He paused, staring into the darkness. Found out later Holt burned 3 families out. Killed a man who tried to stop him. Could have been different if I'd stayed. You can't save everyone. No, but you can stop pretending you don't see what's happening. Silas looked at her, his gray eyes reflecting starlight. You fight because it's your land. I fight because men like Vane shouldn't get to just take things because they've got more guns. That's all. Evelyn felt something shift between them, some understanding that didn't need more words. They sat in comfortable silence until the sky started graying with dawn, then went inside to prepare for whatever the day would bring. They rode out at 10, giving themselves plenty of time to scout the Miller place before noon. The old homestead sat in a shallow valley halfway between Evelyn's ranch and 3 Bars land, abandoned for years after the Millers gave up and moved to Oregon. The house was a skeleton of rotting timber. The barn had collapsed on itself, and weeds choked what used to be a yard. Silas circled the property twice, checking sight lines and escape routes. If this goes bad, ride east. There's cover in those rocks about 200 yards out. I'll hold them here long enough for you to get clear. If it goes bad, we both get clear. Evelyn, I'm not leaving you here to die alone while I run. We do this together or not at all. Silas studied her for a moment, then nodded. All right, together. They positioned themselves near the remains of the barn where they had decent cover and clear views of all approaches. Evelyn's hands were steady on her rifle, but her heart hammered against her ribs. Everything Daniel had built, everything she'd fought for, came down to whatever happened in the next hour. At 5 minutes to noon, riders appeared on the northern horizon. Evelyn counted 8 men, not 1. Her stomach dropped. He said he'd come alone. He lied. Surprise. Silas's voice was flat, unsurprised. Stay sharp. The riders approached in formation, Vane at the front on a tall black horse that probably cost more than Evelyn's entire herd. He wore a suit jacket despite the heat, looking more like a banker than a rancher, and his pale eyes scanned the ruins with cold calculation. He stopped 30 yards out, his men spreading into a loose line behind him. Mrs. Mercer, Vane called, his voice carrying easily across the distance. I appreciate you coming. Evelyn stepped into view but kept the barn between her and the riders. You said you'd come alone. I said I wanted to discuss terms. I never said anything about trust. Vane smiled, thin and sharp. Surely you can understand that. What I understand is that you're a liar and a thief who's been stealing land through fraud. I've got documents proving it. Documents from Boise. Vane said it like he was discussing the weather. Yes, I heard about your little trip. Very enterprising, but I'm afraid you've misunderstood something fundamental about how things work in Idaho Territory. The law is the law. The law is whatever people with power say it is. Vane leaned forward slightly in his saddle. You have papers. Congratulations. But I have judges, sheriffs, land commissioners, and 50 armed men. Your papers are worth exactly as much as your ability to enforce them, and we both know you can't. Silas's voice cut through the tension like a blade. She's not alone anymore. Vane's eyes shifted to Silas, studying him with new interest. The mysterious drifter. I've heard about you. Asked around. Nobody seems to know where you came from or what you want. Don't need to know where I came from to know I'm here. True. But it makes me wonder what happens when you leave. Because drifters always leave eventually. And then Mrs. Mercer will be alone again, facing problems that won't just disappear because she filed some paperwork in Boise. Evelyn's anger flared hot and bright. Is that your offer? Threats disguised as concern? My offer is practical. Vane straightened in his saddle. I'll pay you fair market value for your ranch. $50,000. That's more than generous given the condition of your property and the challenges you're facing. Take the money, start over somewhere easier, and we all walk away without more bloodshed. My ranch isn't for sale. Everything's for sale, Mrs. Mercer. It's just a question of price. Then the price is something you can't afford, like integrity or basic human decency. Vane's smile vanished. You're being foolish. I've tried to be reasonable. I've offered you more chances than you deserve. But if you insist on fighting this, you need to understand what you're up against. Your cattle can disappear. Your water can be poisoned. Your barn can burn. Accidents happen all the time in Idaho Territory, especially to stubborn women who don't know when to quit. Silas took a step forward, his hand resting on his revolver. Careful. Or what? Vane's voice turned mocking. You'll shoot me? In front of 8 witnesses? That would make things very easy for me. Self-defense. You'd hang before the week was out. Maybe, but you'd still be dead. The air went electric. Vane's men shifted in their saddles, hands moving toward weapons. Evelyn's finger tightened on her rifle trigger. One wrong move and the valley would explode into gunfire. Then Vane did something unexpected. He laughed. You've got sand, I'll give you that. He looked at Evelyn with something that might have been respect if it wasn't so cold. Both of you, but sand doesn't win wars. Money does. Power does. And I have both in abundance. He gathered his reins. You have 24 hours to reconsider my offer. After that, I stop being reasonable. And trust me, Mrs. Mercer, you don't want to see what unreasonable looks like. He turned his horse and rode away, his men following in tight formation. Evelyn watched them disappear over the ridge, her whole body trembling with adrenaline and rage. He's going to attack, she said quietly. Yeah, tonight probably. Maybe tomorrow. But soon. We need help. More guns. Something. Silas was quiet for a moment, thinking. There might be a way, but you're not going to like it. Try me. Valleys full of people Vane has squeezed. Families he's pushed off their land, ranchers he's undercut, business owners he's threatened. They're all scared, but scared people can be dangerous if they've got something to fight for. Evelyn stared at him. You want to start a rebellion? I want to show them they're not alone. That one woman with legal documents stood up to Vane and lived to talk about it. Fear is Vane's weapon. Take that away and he's just a rich man with too many enemies. Nobody's going to help me. They think I'm crazy. Then let's change their minds. They rode back to the ranch and Silas immediately saddled a fresh horse. I'm going to make some visits, talk to people, see who might be willing to stand with you if it comes to a fight. Where are you going? The Hendersons had family still in the valley. The Carsons' sons are working for wages in Silverbow. There's a freighter named Mackenzie who Vane tried to shut down last year. People remember getting pushed. Sometimes they just need someone to tell them it's okay to push back. Evelyn wanted to argue, wanted to say it was too dangerous, but she knew he was right. Alone, she was just a stubborn widow. With others, she was a movement. Be careful. Always am. He rode out, leaving Evelyn alone at the ranch with her thoughts and her rifle. She spent the afternoon reinforcing defenses, moving ammunition to strategic positions, preparing for the assault she knew was coming. Every sound made her jump. Every shadow could be an enemy. As the sun started dropping, she heard horses approaching from the south. Her heart slammed into her throat. Too soon. Silas wasn't back yet, and she was alone, but it wasn't Vane's men. 4 riders came into view, and Evelyn recognized them with shock. Martin Shipley and his brother from Silverbow, old men who'd never shown her anything but contempt. Behind them rode a woman named Sarah Crenshaw, whose husband had sold out to Vane 2 years ago, and a younger man Evelyn didn't know. They stopped at the gate, and Martin Shipley cleared his throat awkwardly. "Ms. Mercer, your man Silas came by the store. Said you could use some help." Evelyn's throat went tight. "You came to help me?" "Came to help keep Vane from taking another ranch." Martin's weathered face was hard but honest. "I was wrong about you. Thought you were just stubborn. Didn't realize you were fighting. There's a difference." Sarah Crenshaw spoke up, her voice quiet but firm. "My husband gave up without a fight. Let Vane buy us out cheap and lived with the shame until it killed him. I won't watch another family go through that. Not if I can stop it." The young man nodded. "Name's Tom Carson. My daddy lost his ranch to Vane last year. I'd like to make him pay for that." Evelyn felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she forced them down. "I can't pay you. Can't even promise this ends well." "Don't need paying." Martin hefted his rifle. "Just point us where you need us." More riders arrived as the sun dropped lower. The freighter Mackenzie with 2 of his drivers. A rancher named Polk, who'd been fighting Vane's water rights claims for 18 months. A widow named Ruth Timmons, whose sons had been run off their land by 3 Bars riders. By the time Silas returned at dusk, 12 people stood in Evelyn's yard, armed and angry and ready. Silas dismounted and walked to Evelyn, his expression carefully neutral. "Told you. Scared people are dangerous when they stop being scared." Evelyn looked at the faces surrounding her, hardened by sun and struggle, lined with losses that couldn't be measured in acres or dollars. They weren't an army. They were farmers and freighters and shopkeepers who'd decided that enough was enough. "Thank you," she said, her voice carrying across the yard. "All of you. I know what this costs. I know what you're risking. But if we stand together, Vane can't keep doing this. Not to me. Not to anyone." "Fine speech," Martin said gruffly. "Now what's the plan?" Silas took over, his voice calm and certain. "Vane will come tonight or tomorrow. He'll expect Evelyn to be alone or maybe with me. He won't expect this. We position people at key points around the property, create overlapping fields of fire, make sure nobody can approach without being seen. When they come, we don't start shooting. We show them we're here, we're ready, and we're not backing down." "And if they attack anyway?" Tom Carson asked. "Then we end it." Silas's gray eyes were cold. "But we don't fire first. Let Vane make the choice. Let everyone see who wanted peace and who wanted blood." They worked through the night, positioning defenders in the barn loft, behind the water troughs, in the house. Evelyn made coffee and distributed ammunition while Silas directed movements with the precision of someone who'd done this before. By midnight, the ranch was as ready as it could be. And then they waited. The attack came at dawn, just as the sky was turning gray. Evelyn was in the loft when she spotted them. Not 18 riders this time, but at least 30, coming from 3 directions at once. Vane had brought everyone. "They're here!" she shouted. The defenders scrambled to positions. Evelyn's heart hammered so hard she thought it might break her ribs. 30 men against 12. The math was brutal. But then something changed. As Vane's riders got closer, they slowed. Stopped. They'd expected 1 or 2 defenders. Instead, they saw rifle barrels protruding from the loft, from the windows, from behind cover positions. They saw the Shipley brothers standing at the gate with shotguns. They saw Sarah Crenshaw and Ruth Timmons flanking the yard with Winchesters. Vane rode to the front, his face dark with fury. "What the hell is this?" Silas stepped into view, his rifle cradled casually, but his stance ready. "Change of plans. This is private property." "That's right, it is. Mrs. Mercer's property, and she's got friends now." Cutter, Vane's scarred foreman, rode forward. "You're outnumbered. Stand down." Martin Shipley laughed, harsh and bitter. "Boy, We're all standing on property line. You attack, you're trespassing with intent to harm. That's a hanging offense even in Idaho territory. You willing to die for Vane's greed?" Vane's men exchanged glances. This wasn't what they'd signed up for. Pushing around a lone woman was one thing. Attacking a fortified position with witnesses was something else entirely. Vane's horse danced nervously. "You're all making a mistake. This doesn't concern you." "Concerns us plenty," Mackenzie called from the barn. "You've been pushing people around this valley for years. Time somebody pushed back." Vane's eyes swept the defenders, calculating odds, counting rifles, measuring resolve. Evelyn could see him thinking, weighing whether his pride was worth the casualties. "This is your last warning," Silas said quietly. "Leave now, and nobody gets hurt. Stay, and we defend this property with everything we have. Your choice." The silence stretched like a wire pulled too tight. Then Evelyn did something that surprised everyone, including herself. She climbed down from the loft, walked across the yard, and stopped 10 feet from Vane's horse. Behind her, she heard Silas hiss her name, but she ignored him. "You want to know why I won't sell?" she said, her voice steady and clear. "It's not about the money. It's not even about the land. It's about the fact that you think you can just take things because you're bigger and richer and meaner. But you can't. Not anymore. Because these people are done being afraid of you." Vane stared down at her, his pale eyes full of cold calculation. "You think this changes anything? You think a few shopkeepers with rifles make you safe? I think you rode out here with 30 men expecting an easy fight, and now you're looking at 12 people who are willing to die rather than let you have one more inch of this valley. So yeah, I think that changes things. You're a fool. Maybe. But I'm a fool who's still standing on my own land. You going to change that, or are you going to ride away?" For a long, terrible moment, Evelyn thought Vane would order the attack. She could see it in his eyes, that cold fury, that need to crush anything that defied him. 30 men could overwhelm 12 eventually, and Vane knew it. But he also knew what it would cost, and more importantly, he knew everyone in the valley would hear about it. Word would spread that Colton Vane had attacked 12 people defending a woman's legal property, that he'd been willing to kill to steal land he had no right to. His empire was built on fear, but it was maintained by the appearance of legitimacy. This would shatter that. Vane's jaw worked, his hands tight on the reins. Then he did something Evelyn never expected. He smiled. "You've made your point, Mrs. Mercer." His voice was smooth again, controlled. "I underestimated you. That's my mistake. But this isn't over, not by a long shot. You've won this round. Enjoy it while you can." He pulled his horse around sharply and rode north. His men followed, some reluctantly, some with visible relief. Evelyn stood in the yard watching them go, her whole body shaking with adrenaline and exhaustion and something that felt dangerously close to victory. Silas appeared at her elbow. "That was either the bravest or stupidest thing I've ever seen." "Which one?" "Still deciding." The defenders emerged from their positions, and for a moment nobody spoke. They just faced down the most powerful man in the valley and lived. It didn't feel real yet. Then Martin Shipley let out a whoop, and suddenly everyone was talking at once, laughing with the wild relief of people who'd expected to die and didn't. Evelyn felt hands shaking hers, heard voices congratulating her, saw faces that had been hard with suspicion now showing something like respect. Sarah Crenshaw hugged her tight, and Ruth Timmons patted her shoulder with rough affection. "You did it," Sarah said. "You actually did it." "We did it." Evelyn looked at the faces surrounding her. "All of us." Silas pulled her aside while the others celebrated. "He meant what he said. This isn't over." "I know. He'll come at you different now. Legal challenges, political pressure. He'll try to ruin you without firing a shot." "Then we'll fight that too." Evelyn met his eyes. "I'm not giving up, Silas. Not now. Not ever." Something passed between them, some understanding that went deeper than words. Silas nodded slowly. "All right then. We keep fighting." The defenders stayed through the morning, helping repair fences and move cattle, talking about what came next. Plans were made to watch Vane's movements, to gather evidence of his other fraudulent claims, to present a united front if he tried to squeeze anyone else in the valley. By noon, they started drifting away, back to their own properties and problems. But something had changed. They weren't isolated families anymore. They were people who'd stood together and survived. Martin Shipley was the last to leave. He stopped at the gate and looked at Evelyn with grudging respect. "You're tougher than you look, Ms. Mercer." "Had to be." "Daniel would be proud." Evelyn's throat tightened. "Thank you." She watched him ride away, then turned to find Silas checking the barn for damage that didn't exist. He was avoiding her eyes, his movements restless. "Something wrong?" she asked. "Just thinking." "About what?" Silas stopped, his back to her. "About the fact that Vane's going to shift tactics now, which means you need to hit him first before he can regroup. Strike while he's rattled." "How?" "We take those documents to the territorial marshal in Boise, not the county judge here who Vane probably owns, the marshal, federal authority. Someone who can actually investigate the fraud and file charges that matter." Evelyn felt her stomach sink. "That means leaving again." "Yeah." "And you?" Silas finally turned to face her. "I'll stay here. Guard the ranch. Make sure Vane doesn't try anything while you're gone." "I can't keep asking you to risk yourself for my land." "You're not asking. I'm choosing." His gray eyes were steady, certain. "This matters, Evelyn. What you're doing here matters. And I'm not leaving until it's finished." She wanted to say something about why it mattered to him, why he cared so much about a ranch that wasn't his, and a fight that wasn't originally his to fight. But she could see in his face that he didn't have those answers yet, or maybe he did and couldn't say them out loud. "Okay," she said finally. "I'll leave tomorrow. But Silas, if Vane comes while I'm gone, I'll handle it. I'm serious. Don't die for this." Something flickered in his eyes, almost a smile. "I'll do my best." That night, they sat on the porch again, watching stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. The cattle were quiet, the ranch was still, and for a moment it felt like peace. "You ever think about what comes after?" Evelyn asked. "After what?" "After we win. After Vane's beaten and the land is secure and there's no more fighting." Silas was quiet for a long time. "Honest answer?" "Always." "No, I stopped thinking about after a long time ago. You live long enough doing what I do, you learn to take it one day at a time. That's no way to live. It's the only way I know." He looked at her, his weathered face shadowed in the dim light. "But maybe that changes. Maybe this is different." Evelyn felt something shift in her chest, something warm and terrifying and impossible to name. She wanted to say something, wanted to ask what he meant by different, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she just sat beside him in the comfortable silence of two people who understood what it meant to fight for something worth keeping. Tomorrow she would ride to Boise again. Tomorrow she would face federal marshals and legal proceedings and all the bureaucratic machinery required to bring down a man like Vane. But tonight, for just a few hours, she let herself believe that maybe they'd already won the most important battle, the one that proved they didn't have to fight alone. Evelyn left at first light with the certified documents packed carefully in her saddlebag and a knot of worry sitting heavy in her chest. She'd made this ride before, but it felt different now. Before, she'd been desperate and alone. Now she was leaving behind people who depended on her, a ranch that had become more than just land, and a man whose quiet presence had somehow become necessary. Silas stood at the gate watching her prepare to leave, his expression unreadable in the early morning shadows. "You remember the route?" he asked. "Every mile of it. Stay off the main roads. Vane's got people watching." "I know. And if anything feels wrong, I'll turn around." Evelyn adjusted her reins, then looked at him directly. "You keep this place standing, you hear me? I didn't fight this hard just to come back and find ashes. Ranch will be here when you get back." "You better be here too." Something flickered in Silas's gray eyes. Wasn't planning on going anywhere. She wanted to say more, wanted to tell him that she didn't know how to do this without him anymore, but the words felt too big and too frightening to speak out loud. So instead she just nodded once, touched her heels to Bridget's sides, and rode north without looking back. The journey felt longer this time, stretched by worry and the weight of what she was carrying. She pushed hard the first day, making it past Blackwood Station by nightfall. Curtis Vale spotted her riding through and intercepted her at the edge of town. "Heading back to Boise?" "Got business with the territorial marshal." Curtis studied her with those sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Heard about the standoff at your place. Word's spreading fast. People are saying you faced down Vane with a dozen farmers and sent him running." "We didn't send him running. We just made him think twice. That's more than anybody else has managed in 5 years. Curtis handed her a canteen. Marshal's office is on 3rd Street, red brick building next to the courthouse. Man you want to see is named Thomas Garrett. He's honest, which around here is rarer than gold. How do you know him? Let's just say we've had dealings. Tell him Curtis sent you. He'll listen. Evelyn thanked him and rode on, reaching Boise 2 days later, bone-tired and wind-burned. The city felt even busier than before, crowded with miners and settlers and people chasing whatever version of fortune they thought Idaho Territory offered. She found a different boarding house this time, one that didn't ask questions, and slept for 6 hours before forcing herself up to face the marshal's office. The building was exactly where Curtis said it would be, squat and official-looking, with bars on the windows and a weathered sign that read, U.S. Marshal, Idaho Territory. Evelyn tied Bridget outside, straightened her dusty clothes as best she could, and walked through the door with her documents clutched tight. The office was cramped and smelled like tobacco and old paper. A deputy sat at a desk near the entrance, middle-aged with suspicious eyes and a badge that had seen better days. Help you. I need to see Marshal Garrett. It's urgent. Marshal's busy. You can leave a message. I've got evidence of systematic land fraud in Silverbow District. Fraudulent boundary amendments, forged claims, corruption of local officials. I need to speak with him directly. The deputy's expression shifted from bored to interested. That's a serious accusation. I've got serious proof. Evelyn set the leather envelope on his desk. Certified documents from the Territorial Land Office showing discrepancies between original filings and amended claims filed by 3 Bars Ranch. Owner's name is Colton Vane. The deputy's eyes widened slightly. He'd heard the name. Everyone had. Wait here. He disappeared through a door at the back of the office. Evelyn waited, her heart hammering, her hands clenched so tight her nails bit into her palms. This was it. If the marshal wouldn't listen, if he was bought like Sheriff Talbot, then the legal fight was over before it started. 5 minutes later, the deputy returned with a tall man in his 50s, lean and weathered with iron-gray hair and eyes that looked like they'd seen every kind of human ugliness and hadn't flinched yet. Mrs. Mercer? I'm Marshal Garrett. My deputy says you've got information about land fraud in Silverbow. Yes, sir. And I think it goes deeper than just one ranch. Garrett studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Come on back. Let's see what you've got. His office was small and cluttered with maps and case files stacked on every surface. He cleared space on his desk and gestured for Evelyn to sit. Start from the beginning. So she did. She told him about Daniel's death, about Vane's offers and threats, about the poisoned well and the rustlers and the 30 men who'd showed up at her ranch ready to kill. She told him about the documents she'd found in Boise proving Vane had been filing fraudulent boundary amendments, and about the people in Silverbow who were too scared to speak up because Vane owned the sheriff and probably the judge too. Garrett listened without interrupting, his expression neutral but his eyes sharp. When she finished, he spread her documents across his desk and studied them carefully. These are legitimate, he said finally. Certified copies from the Territorial Land Office. Your original claim is valid, which means Vane's amended boundaries are fraudulent. He looked up at her. You know what you're asking me to do here? I'm asking you to enforce the law. I'm asking if you understand what it means to go after a man like Colton Vane. He's got money. He's got political connections. He's got lawyers who'll drag this out for years. And in the meantime, he's got 50 hired guns who don't care about warrants or badges. I understand all of that. I've been living it for 3 years. Garrett leaned back in his chair. Curtis Vale said you had spine. Looks like he was right. He tapped the documents. I can open an investigation, subpoena land office records, interview victims, build a case. But it takes time, months, maybe longer. Can you hold out that long? I don't have a choice. There's always a choice. You could take Vane's money and walk away. Start over somewhere he doesn't reach. Evelyn met his eyes directly. Marshal, if I walk away, Vane wins. And the next family he targets won't even bother fighting because they'll know nobody ever stood up to him and survived. I can't live with that. Something shifted in Garrett's expression. A flicker of respect or maybe just recognition of someone too stubborn to know when they were beaten. All right then. I'll open the investigation, but I need you to understand something. The law moves slow and Vane moves fast. You need to be very careful between now and when I can bring charges. I've got people watching my back now. Good people who are tired of being pushed. Good. Keep them close. Garrett stood and offered his hand. I'll send a deputy to Silverbow to start gathering evidence. In the meantime, you lay low and don't give Vane any excuse to claim self-defense if things go bad. Evelyn shook his hand, feeling the weight of what she'd just set in motion. Thank you, Marshal. Don't thank me yet. We've got a long road ahead. She left the marshal's office feeling something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Real hope, backed by federal authority and a lawman who seemed to actually care about justice. It wasn't over, not by a long shot, but for the first time the fight felt winnable. The ride back took 3 days because she pushed hard, barely stopping except to rest the horse and grab a few hours of sleep. Her mind was already racing ahead, planning what came next, thinking about how to hold the ranch together while Garrett built his case. She was 2 miles from home when she saw the smoke. Her heart stopped. Then it started again, slamming against her ribs with sick terror. She kicked Bridget into a gallop, racing toward the ranch with her rifle in hand and prayers she didn't believe in running through her head. Please let it be a grass fire. Please let it be nothing. Please let Silas be alive. She crested the final rise and saw the ranch spread out below. The house was standing, the barn was intact, but smoke poured from something near the north fence line, thick and black. Evelyn rode hard into the yard and nearly collided with Silas coming out of the barn. He was covered in soot, his face streaked with ash, but he was alive and whole, and she felt something break loose in her chest. What happened? Vane's men tried to burn the hay storage last night. We caught them before they could get to the barn. Silas gestured toward the fence line, where several men were still beating down flames. Lost about 3 tons of hay, but the main stores are safe. Casualties? One of theirs took a bullet in the leg. Rest scattered when we returned fire. Evelyn looked at the smoke, then back at Silas. His eyes were red-rimmed from ash and exhaustion, and she realized he probably hadn't slept since she left. You held them off alone? Not alone. Martin and his brother showed up 2 nights ago, said they figured Vane would try something while you were gone. They've been taking shifts on watch. As if summoned, Martin Shipley emerged from behind the barn, coughing smoke from his lungs. Welcome back, Ms. Mercer. Nice timing. You stayed to help? Told you we were done letting Vane push people around. Martin spat into the dirt. Besides, Silas here doesn't know the first thing about cattle. Somebody had to keep your stock from wandering into the next county. Despite everything, Evelyn almost smiled. Thank you. Save your thanks. We've still got a mess to clean up. They spent the rest of the day dealing with the aftermath, dousing the remaining fires, checking cattle, repairing the damaged fence line. Evelyn worked alongside them, grateful for the physical labor that kept her mind from spinning through everything that could have gone wrong. When evening finally came, she found Silas near the creek washing soot from his face and hands. She sat down beside him without speaking, just watching the water run clear and cold over smooth stones. I saw the marshal, she said after a while. What did he say? He's opening an investigation, sending a deputy to Silverbow to gather evidence. He thinks we've got a real case. Silas nodded slowly. That's good. It'll take months, maybe longer. Then we hold for months. However long it takes. Evelyn picked up a smooth stone and turned it over in her hands. You could leave, you know. You've done more than anyone could ask. More than I had any right to expect. The legal fight is started. The ranch has defenders now. You don't have to stay for what comes next. Silas was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes fixed on the moving water. You want me to leave? No. The word came out harder than she intended. But I don't want you to stay out of obligation either. This is my fight, Silas. It always has been. Maybe it started as your fight, but it's not just yours anymore. He looked at her, and something in his expression made her chest tighten. I've spent 10 years drifting from one place to another, fighting other people's battles and never staying long enough to see how they ended. Always moving, never settling, because settling meant caring and caring meant loss. I'm tired of that. Tired of riding away from things that matter. And this matters? Yeah, this matters. He paused, choosing his words carefully. You matter. The air between them went electric. Evelyn's hand stilled on the stone, her breath catching in her throat. She wanted to say something, wanted to tell him that somewhere in the last few weeks he'd become more than just an ally, more than just a hired gun standing between her and disaster. But the words were too big and too frightening, and she didn't know if she was ready to say them out loud. Silas, you don't have to say anything. His voice was quiet but steady. I'm not asking for promises or declarations. I'm just telling you why I'm staying. Because for the first time in a long time, I found something worth defending. Not just land, not just principle. Something real. Evelyn felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she forced them down. I don't know how to do this. Do what? Trust someone. Let someone stand with me. Daniel was the last person who ever... Her voice broke, and she had to stop and breathe before continuing. When he died, I swore I'd never need anyone again, that I'd be strong enough alone, but I'm not. And I hate that. I hate needing help. I hate that I can't do this by myself. Nobody can do everything alone. That's not weakness. That's just being human. It feels like weakness. It's not. Silas reached out and gently took the stone from her hands, his fingers rough and warm against hers. You fought for 3 years with everything you have. That's not weakness. That's the strongest thing I've ever seen. And if you need help now, if you need people standing beside you, that doesn't diminish any of that. It just means you're smart enough to recognize when the fight's too big for one person. Evelyn looked at their hands, his scarred and calloused from years of violence, hers worn rough from ranch work and survival. Two people damaged by different kinds of wars, finding something like peace in the space between battles. Stay, she said quietly. Please stay. I'm not going anywhere. They sat by the creek until the stars came out, not talking much, just existing in the comfortable silence of two people who didn't need words to understand each other. Eventually, the cold drove them back to the house, where Martin had made a pot of terrible coffee and was regaling his brother with an exaggerated version of the night's battle with Vane's arsonists. Silas here dropped 2 of them before they even knew what hit them, Martin was saying, like watching a damn ghost work. It was dark, Silas said mildly. They were bad at being quiet. Still counts. Martin poured coffee into chipped mugs and handed them around. Point is, Vane's getting desperate. First the rustlers, now arson. He's running out of subtle. Which makes him more dangerous, Evelyn said. Desperate men do stupid things. Let him be stupid. We'll be ready. Martin raised his mug in a mock toast. To being too stubborn to know when we're beaten. I'll drink to that, his brother muttered. They stayed up late planning watch schedules and defensive positions, discussing what Vane might try next and how to counter it. By the time Martin and his brother finally headed back to town, promising to return in 2 days, exhaustion had settled into Evelyn's bones like an old friend. Silas walked them out while Evelyn stood on the porch watching the night. The valley was quiet except for the distant sound of cattle and the wind moving through dry grass. Her valley. Her land. The place Daniel had died defending and she'd bled to keep. You should get some sleep, Silas said, appearing beside her. So should you. When's the last time you slept more than 2 hours? Can't remember. That's what I thought. Evelyn turned to face him. Take the bed in the house tonight. I'll keep watch. Evelyn? That's not a suggestion. You've been running on nothing for days. If Vane attacks tomorrow and you're too tired to shoot straight, we're both dead. Silas looked like he wanted to argue, but exhaustion was written in every line of his face. All right, but wake me in 4 hours. We'll switch. 6 hours. 4. 5, and that's my final offer. The corner of Silas's mouth twitched in something that might have been a smile. Deal. He went inside while Evelyn took up position in the barn loft with her rifle and a thermos of Martin's awful coffee. The night was clear and cold, stars scattered across the sky like someone had thrown diamonds against black velvet. She watched the horizon, listened for sounds that didn't belong, and thought about everything that had brought her to this moment. 3 years ago, she'd been a rancher's wife, happy and safe and convinced the future was something she could plan. Then Daniel died, and the future became something she survived one brutal day at a time. She'd learned to shoot, to fight, to defend property lines with nothing but stubbornness and rage. She'd become hard because hard was the only way to survive. But somewhere in the last few weeks, something had shifted. She wasn't fighting alone anymore. Wasn't carrying the weight of the world on shoulders that were never meant to bear it without help. And maybe that was the point Daniel had tried to make the night Vane's foreman first came calling, back when she'd suggested selling and running. Maybe standing up to bullies wasn't about being strong enough to win alone. Maybe it was about being brave enough to ask for help and trust that others would answer. The night passed without incident. Evelyn woke Silas at dawn, and they switched positions. She slept hard for 6 hours, dreamless and deep, and woke feeling more rested than she had in weeks. Over the next few days, they fell into a rhythm. Silas handled repairs and fence work with Martin's grudging guidance, learning ranch work the hard way through sore muscles and constant mistakes. Evelyn managed the cattle and kept watch for Vane's next move. Defenders rotated through on a loose schedule, keeping eyes on the property and making sure Vane knew they weren't backing down. Word continued spreading through the valley. The widow who'd faced down Colton Vane and lived. The drifter who'd stood beside her when nobody else would. The farmers and shopkeepers who'd decided enough was enough. It became a story people told, a symbol of resistance against the kind of power that usually went unchallenged. But Vane wasn't finished. 10 days after Evelyn's return from Boise, a well-dressed man arrived at the ranch in a buggy, accompanied by 2 riders and carrying an expensive leather briefcase. Evelyn met him at the gate with Silas at her shoulder. "Mrs. Mercer, my name is Harrison Blackwell. I'm an attorney representing Mr. Colton Vane. I've got nothing to say to Vane or his lawyers. I'm not here to threaten you, Mrs. Mercer. I'm here to present you with a formal offer." Blackwell pulled documents from his briefcase. "Mr. Vane is willing to purchase your property for $75,000. That's 50% above fair market value. He's also willing to drop all legal disputes regarding boundary lines and provide written guarantees that you won't face any harassment or retaliation." Evelyn stared at him. "He's trying to buy me off. He's trying to resolve this dispute peacefully. Surely you can see the benefit in that. The legal process will take years. You'll spend thousands in attorney fees, and there's no guarantee you'll win. This offer gives you certainty, financial security, a chance to start over somewhere without all this struggle." "I don't want to start over somewhere else. I want to keep my land." "Mrs. Mercer, be reasonable." "I am being reasonable. Reasonable is defending what's legally mine. Reasonable is not selling to a man who's been trying to steal from me for 3 years. Evelyn's voice went hard. "You tell Vane his money's no good here. This ranch isn't for sale. Not for $75,000. Not for twice that. Not for any amount." Blackwell's professional smile thinned. "You're making a mistake. Wouldn't be the first time. Mr. Vane has been extraordinarily patient with you. More patient than you deserve, frankly. But patience has limits. If you refuse this offer, you're on your own. No more chances, no more negotiations, just the full weight of his legal and financial resources bearing down on you until you break. Is that really what you want?" Silas took a step forward, his voice low and dangerous. "I think Mrs. Mercer made herself clear. Time for you to leave." Blackwell looked at Silas with barely concealed disdain. "And you are?" "Nobody you need to know." "Mr. Vane mentioned there was a drifter playing hero. I assume that's you." Blackwell's tone dripped contempt. "Tell me, how long do you really think you'll stay? Men like you never stick around when things get hard. You'll drift off to the next fight, the next woman who needs saving, and Mrs. Mercer will be alone again facing consequences you helped create." Evelyn saw Silas's jaw tighten, saw his hand drift toward his revolver, and stepped between them. "Get off my property," she said coldly. "Now." Blackwell gathered his documents with deliberate slowness, making a show of his displeasure. "You've been warned, Mrs. Mercer. What happens next is on your head." He climbed back into his buggy and left, his riders following close behind. Evelyn watched them go, her heart hammering with anger and something darker, the knowledge that Vane was escalating, that the lawyer's visit was a prelude to something worse. "He's right about one thing," Silas said quietly. "This is going to get harder before it gets better." "I know. And when it does get harder, when Vane comes at you with everything he's got, you'll be here." Evelyn turned to face him. "Right?" Silas held her gaze, and she saw something in his gray eyes that settled the fear churning in her chest. "I'll be here." That night, lying in bed and staring at the ceiling, Evelyn thought about Blackwell's words, about drifters who never stayed, about being alone again when the fight got too hard. And she thought about the way Silas had looked at her when he promised he'd be there, like it was the easiest promise he'd ever made. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that this time was different, that he wouldn't disappear like everyone else eventually did. But trust was a muscle she'd forgotten how to use, and 3 years of fighting alone had taught her that the only person you could really count on was yourself. Still, as she finally drifted into uneasy sleep, She held on to that promise like a lifeline in dark water. Maybe it would hold, maybe it wouldn't, but for now, for tonight, it was enough to keep the fear at bay. The breakthrough came from an unexpected direction 3 weeks later, not with gunfire or lawyers, but with a frightened clerk named Parsons showing up at Evelyn's ranch just after dawn with a leather satchel clutched to his chest like a shield. Evelyn had been checking fence lines when Silas found her, his expression urgent. "You need to come back to the house, now." "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, but there's someone you need to talk to." They found Parsons pacing nervously in the yard, jumping at every sound. He was thin and pale, maybe 40, with ink-stained fingers and the haunted look of a man who'd seen too much and stayed quiet too long. "Mr. Parsons," Evelyn said carefully, "Silas said you wanted to see me." Parsons glanced around like Vane's men might materialize from thin air. "Is it safe here?" "Safe as anywhere. Come inside." In the kitchen, with coffee poured and the door firmly closed, Parsons finally spoke. His voice shook. "I'm the county clerk in Silverbow. I've been filing Vane's fraudulent land claims for 2 years because he pays me and because I'm scared of what happens if I don't. But last week, Marshal Garrett's deputy came asking questions, and I realized this is all going to come out eventually. I can either go down with Vane or I can save myself." "So you're here to save yourself," Silas said flatly. "I'm here to do the right thing." Finally. Parsons opened the satchel with trembling hands. "These are copies of every fraudulent document Vane made me file. Amended boundary claims, forged surveyor reports, backdated titles, everything. There's also a ledger showing payments he made to me, to Sheriff Talbot, to Judge Morrison. It's all here, proof of systematic corruption going back 3 years." Evelyn stared at the papers spreading across her kitchen table, her heart hammering. This was it. This was everything they needed. "Why now?" she asked. "Why are you doing this now?" Parsons met her eyes, and she saw shame and fear and something that might have been courage fighting for space on his face. "Because I've got a daughter. She's 8, and last night she asked me what I do for work, and I realized I didn't want to tell her the truth. Didn't want her to grow up knowing her father helped a man like Vane steal from people. So I'm doing this. For her. And because you were brave enough to stand up when nobody else would, and that made me ashamed of my cowardice." Evelyn felt her throat tighten. "Marshal Garrett needs to see these." "I know. But I came to you first because if Vane finds out I took these before they're in federal hands, my daughter and I are dead. I need your help getting to Boise safely." "Then we leave today," Silas said. "All of us. We take these documents to Marshal Garrett," Parsons testifies, "and we end this." They rode out within the hour, Evelyn and Silas flanking Parsons, the satchel secured carefully in Evelyn's saddlebag. They took back routes and moved fast, pushing the horses hard. Twice they spotted riders in the distance and detoured into heavy timber until the threat passed. They reached Boise in 2 days without incident, exhausted and wary, and went straight to Marshal Garrett's office. The marshal took one look at what Parsons had brought, and his weathered face went hard with satisfaction. "This is everything," he said, spreading documents across his desk. "Forged claims, bribery records, documented corruption. With Parsons willing to testify, I can bring charges against Vane, Talbot, and Judge Morrison. Federal charges. They won't wiggle out of this." "How long?" Evelyn asked. "I'll have warrants issued by end of week. Vane will be arrested within 10 days. Garrett looked at Parsons. "You did the right thing. Hard thing, but the right thing." Parsons nodded, tears streaking his face. "Will my daughter be safe?" "I'll assign deputies to watch your family until this is resolved. Vane touches you or yours," he adds, witness intimidation to his charges. "That's federal prison time." They spent 2 more days in Boise while Garrett processed the evidence and prepared arrest warrants. Parsons gave his formal testimony, signing statements that would bury Vane's empire under the weight of documented fraud. Evelyn watched the machinery of justice finally turning in the right direction, and felt something she'd almost forgotten: vindication. On the ride back to Silverbow, she and Silas didn't talk much. The weight of what they'd accomplished was too big for words. 3 years of fighting, of standing alone against impossible odds, of refusing to break no matter how hard Vane pushed, and now it was ending. Not with bullets or fire, but with the law doing exactly what it was supposed to do. They were a mile from the ranch when they saw the smoke again. Evelyn's stomach dropped. "No, not now. Not when we're this close." They kicked their horses into a gallop. racing toward the ranch with weapons drawn and hearts pounding. But as they crested the final rise, Evelyn realized the smoke wasn't coming from her property. It was coming from 3 Bars Ranch, 5 miles north. They reined in hard, staring at the thick black column rising into the sky. Silas pulled out the small telescope he carried and studied the distance. "Looks like the main house," he said quietly. "And I'm seeing riders, a lot of them, leaving." "Vane's men?" "Hard to say from here, but if I had to guess, rats leaving a sinking ship." Word of the marshal's warrants must have spread faster than Garrett anticipated. Vane's empire was collapsing in real time, his hired guns scattering before federal law could catch them, his carefully constructed facade of legitimacy crumbling into ash and ruin. Evelyn felt no satisfaction watching it burn, just tired relief that it was over. They rode to the ranch in silence. Everything was exactly as they'd left it: barns standing, cattle grazing, fences holding. Martin and his brother had kept watch while they were gone, and both men emerged from the barn looking worn but alive. "Welcome back," Martin said. "Heard some interesting rumors from town. Something about federal warrants?" "Not rumors," Evelyn said, dismounting. "Marshal Garrett's issuing arrest warrants for Vane, Talbot, and Judge Morrison. Fraud charges, corruption, everything." Martin let out a long breath. "Well, damn. You actually did it." "We did it, all of us." "Still, that's something." Martin looked toward the smoke rising from 3 Bars. "Looks like Vane's having a bad day." "Looks like." They spent the evening quietly, too exhausted for celebration, just sitting on the porch and watching the sun drop behind the mountains. Silas cleaned weapons that didn't need cleaning. Martin and his brother shared a bottle of whiskey they'd been saving. And Evelyn sat with her coffee going cold, trying to process the fact that the fight that had consumed 3 years of her life was actually, finally, over. "You all right?" Silas asked, settling beside her. "I don't know. I thought I'd feel different, triumphant or relieved or something, but mostly I just feel empty." "That's normal. You've been running on rage and fear for so long you don't remember what peace feels like." "Is that what this is? Peace?" "Close enough." Silas looked at her, his gray eyes reflecting the last light. "What happens now?" "Now I figure out how to actually run this ranch without fighting for my life every day. Learn how to live instead of just survive." She paused. "What about you? What about me?" "You staying or leaving?" Silas was quiet for a long moment. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether you want me to stay." Evelyn's chest tightened. They'd been dancing around this conversation for weeks, both of them too careful or too scared to say what they actually meant. But the fight was over now. The guns were silent. There was nothing left to hide behind. "I want you to stay," she said quietly. "Not because I need protection or help with the ranch. Not because I'm scared to be alone. I want you to stay because somewhere in all this chaos, you became someone I don't want to lose." Silas's expression shifted, something vulnerable and cautious appearing in his weathered face. "I'm not good at staying, not good at normal life. I've spent 10 years drifting because drifting was easier than caring about something and watching it disappear. I'm not asking you to be good at it. I'm just asking you to try." "Evelyn, I know it's complicated. I know we're both damaged and difficult and terrible at trusting people, but maybe that's exactly why this works. Because we understand what it costs to stand up when everyone else runs. We understand what it means to fight for something even when the odds are impossible." She took a breath. "I love Daniel. I'll always love Daniel, but he's gone, and I'm still here, and I'm tired of being alone. So I'm asking, will you stay?" Silas looked at her for a long moment, and she saw him fighting something internal, some old wound or fear that told him attachment meant loss. Then something in his expression softened. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I'll stay." Evelyn felt something break open in her chest. 3 years of walls and defenses crumbling all at once. She reached out and took his hand, scarred and rough and real, and he held it like he was holding something precious. They sat like that until full dark, not saying much, just existing together in the space between war and whatever came next. The arrest came 5 days later. Federal marshals rode into Silverbow with warrants and rifles, taking Vane into custody at his burned-out ranch house where he'd been trying to salvage records before fleeing. Sheriff Talbot was arrested at his office, and Judge Morrison was pulled from his home in the middle of dinner. Word spread through the valley like wildfire. The empire had fallen, the corruption was exposed, and the law had finally done its job. Evelyn heard the news from Curtis Vale, who rode all the way from Blackwood Station just to tell her in person. "Thought you'd want to know," Curtis said, grinning wider than she'd ever seen. "Vane's in federal custody. They're saying trial might start within 3 months. With Parsons testifying and all those documents, he's facing 20 years minimum." 20 years, Evelyn repeated, trying to make the words feel real. Maybe more if they can prove the Hendersons' fire was arson, which they probably can now that people aren't too scared to talk. After Curtis left, Evelyn walked out to Daniel's grave on the ridge overlooking the valley. She hadn't been up here in months, too busy fighting to spare time for grief. But now, with the fight over, she finally had space to breathe. "We won," she told the simple wooden cross marking his resting place. "It took 3 years and help I didn't know how to ask for, but we won. The ranch is ours, the land is secure, and Vane's going to prison for what he did." The wind moved through the grass, carrying the smell of sage and dust. "I met someone," she continued quietly. "His name's Silas. You would have liked him. He's stubborn and difficult and doesn't talk much, kind of like you that way. But he stood with me when nobody else would, kept me alive when I probably should have died. And I think I'm ready to stop fighting alone. I think I'm ready to let someone in again." She waited, listening to the wind, half expecting some sign that Daniel approved or understood. But there was just silence and sky and the endless Idaho territory stretching in all directions. "I'll always love you," she said, "but I have to keep living, and that means moving forward, even when it's scary. I hope you understand." She stayed a while longer, then walked back down to the ranch where Silas was attempting to fix a gate that didn't really need fixing. He looked up as she approached, his expression questioning. "You all right?" "Yeah, I am." "Where'd you go?" "Talked to Daniel, told him we won, told him about you." Silas set down his tools. "What did you tell him about me?" "That you're stubborn and difficult and don't talk much." "That's fair. And that I want you to stay. Not just for now. For as long as you're willing." Silas studied her face, reading everything she wasn't saying out loud. Then he crossed the distance between them and pulled her into his arms, holding her tight while she finally let herself break down and cry. Not from sadness or fear, but from pure exhausted relief that the war was over and she'd survived it. They stood like that for a long time, two damaged people holding each other together in the middle of land worth fighting for. The trial happened in late November, cold and bureaucratic, and nothing like the dramatic confrontation Evelyn had imagined. Vane sat in federal court looking diminished and angry, his expensive suit unable to hide the fact that he was just a bully who'd been caught. Parsons testified. Other victims came forward, emboldened by Evelyn's fight. Documents were entered into evidence. The case was open and shut. Vane was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. Talbot got 12. Judge Morrison got 10 and was permanently disbarred. Three Bars Ranch was seized by territorial authorities and parceled out to families Vane had displaced, including the Hendersons and Carsons. The valley began healing, slowly and imperfectly, but healing nonetheless. Evelyn and Silas didn't attend the trial. They stayed at the ranch, working together to prepare for winter. Silas learned ranching through trial and error and constant mistakes, but he was patient and determined, and eventually the cattle stopped treating him like a threat. Evelyn taught him everything Daniel had taught her, and in return, Silas taught her that strength didn't mean doing everything alone. They found a rhythm together. Not perfect, not easy, but real. They argued about fence placement and cattle rotation. They worked side by side, mending equipment and hauling feed. They sat on the porch in the evenings, watching the valley turn gold and purple with sunset, comfortable in the silence of two people who didn't need constant words to understand each other. Martin and Sarah and the others came by regularly, no longer defenders but friends. The valley was different now, no longer divided between the powerful and the powerless, but something closer to a community where people looked out for each other. One morning in early December, Evelyn woke to find fresh snow covering everything in clean white silence. She stood on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the sun rise over land that was finally, truly hers. Silas emerged from the barn, his breath fogging in the cold air. He climbed the porch steps and stood beside her, not speaking, just sharing the moment. You ever think about what you would have done if you'd just ridden past that day? Evelyn asked. If you'd seen the dust and kept going? Sometimes. Do you regret stopping? Silas looked at her, his gray eyes steady and clear. No, not for a second. Even though you got dragged into a war that wasn't yours? It became mine the moment I decided it mattered. He paused. You taught me something, Evelyn. You taught me that running from things doesn't make them disappear. That standing up is hard, but it's the only thing that actually changes anything. And that sometimes the fights worth fighting are the ones for other people, not just yourself. Evelyn felt her throat tighten. I couldn't have done this alone. You did it alone for 3 years, and it nearly killed me. I was so focused on being strong enough to survive by myself that I forgot there's a different kind of strength in letting people help, in building something together instead of defending it alone. She turned to face him fully. Daniel believed in standing up to bullies. He believed some things were worth dying for. But I think he got it wrong. Or maybe not wrong, but incomplete. It's not about what you're willing to die for. It's about what you're willing to live for, and who you're willing to live beside. Silas reached out and brushed snow from her hair, his touch gentle despite his rough hands. So what are you willing to live for? This ranch, this life, this valley where people finally learn to stand together. She smiled. And you? I'm willing to live for you. That's a lot of pressure. Think you can handle it? I'll do my best. They went back inside together, leaving footprints in the fresh snow, and spent the morning planning spring planting and talking about adding rooms to the house because it was too small for 2 people who actually wanted to build a future together. Later that day, Evelyn rode into Silverbow for supplies and found the town transformed. People who'd avoided eye contact for 3 years now nodded greetings. Women who'd whispered about her stopped to ask how she was doing. Men who'd called her crazy now tipped their hats with something like respect. She ran into Parsons outside the general store. He looked healthier now, less haunted, standing with his daughter, who clutched a peppermint stick. Mrs. Mercer, he said quietly, I wanted to thank you again for giving me the courage to do the right thing. You gave yourself that courage. I just showed you it was possible. Still, my daughter's going to grow up in a valley where men like Vane don't win. That's because of you. Evelyn knelt down to the little girl's level. What's your name? Emma, the girl said shyly. Emma, your father's a brave man. Don't ever forget that. Emma nodded solemnly, then went back to her peppermint stick. Evelyn finished her shopping and rode home as the sun started dropping, the valley bathed in golden light. She thought about all the people who'd stood with her, all the small acts of courage that had added up to victory. Martin bringing his shotgun, Sarah refusing to let another family fall, Parsons choosing his daughter's future over his fear, Silas stopping when he could have kept riding, and herself refusing to quit when quitting would have been easier. That was the thing about fighting impossible odds. You didn't win by being stronger or smarter or better armed than your enemy. You won by refusing to break, by getting up every morning and doing the work even when it felt pointless, by standing in the gap and saying no further even when nobody else would stand beside you. And sometimes, if you were lucky, your refusal to break inspired others to find their own courage. Your fight became their fight. Your stand became a movement. And the impossible became possible because enough people decided they were done being afraid. When Evelyn reached the ranch, Silas was working on the new room addition, measuring boards with careful precision. He looked up as she dismounted, his weathered face breaking into something that might have been a smile. How was town? Different. Good different. Good. Evelyn walked over and studied his work. You know what you're doing with that? Not even a little bit, but I'm learning. That's all any of us can do. They worked together until dark, building something new on land they'd fought to protect. The hammer strikes echoed across the valley, a sound of construction instead of destruction, of growth instead of defense. That night, sitting on the porch with coffee and blankets against the cold, Evelyn thought about everything that had brought her to this moment. The loss and grief and endless fighting, the fear and exhaustion and moments when giving up seemed like the only sane option, but also the small victories. The morning Daniel's claim documents proved valid. The day 12 people showed up ready to fight beside her. The moment Silas promised he'd stay. You thinking about something deep? Silas asked. Just that 3 years ago, I thought my life was over, that losing Daniel meant losing everything that mattered. But I was wrong. Life doesn't end when you lose someone. It just changes. Gets harder in some ways, easier in others. And if you're lucky, really lucky, you find reasons to keep going even when you don't think you can. What were your reasons?
Stubbornness mostly. Rage. A refusal to let Vane win. She paused. But also hope. The kind I didn't even know I still had until I saw you standing at my gate that day offering to fight beside me. You gave me something I'd lost when Daniel died. You reminded me that I didn't have to carry everything alone. Silas was quiet for a moment. I spent 10 years running from exactly what you're describing, from connections that might turn into loss, from caring enough about something that losing it would hurt. I thought detachment was safety. Turns out it was just a different kind of prison. And now? Now I'm done running, done drifting, done pretending I don't need people or places or things worth protecting. He looked at her, and in his gray eyes she saw everything he couldn't quite put into words. I found what I was running from, and it turns out it's exactly what I needed. Evelyn reached out and took his hand, rough and scarred and steady. So we're doing this? Building something real? Staying instead of running? Yeah, we're doing this. Even when it's hard? Especially when it's hard. They sat like that until the stars came out, two people who'd survived impossible odds and found something worth protecting in each other. The Idaho Territory spread around them vast and indifferent, but here on this small patch of land they'd defended with everything they had, there was warmth and safety and the promise of tomorrow. The ranch would need work. The valley would need healing. Winter would be hard, and spring would bring new challenges. But for the first time in 3 years, Evelyn wasn't facing it alone. She had Silas beside her, friends who'd proven they'd stand when it mattered, and land that was legally, undeniably, permanently hers. She thought about Daniel sometimes, about the future they'd planned together that never happened, but mostly she thought about the future she was building now, different from what she'd imagined, but real and hard-won and entirely hers. That was the thing about surviving. You didn't get the life you planned. You got the life you fought for. And if you fought hard enough, long enough, refused to break even when breaking seemed inevitable, you got something better than plans. You got proof that you were stronger than you knew, braver than you believed, and capable of building something worth defending even in the most hostile territory. Evelyn Mercer had stood alone against an empire and won. But more than that, she'd learned that standing alone was never the goal. The goal was standing until others found courage to stand beside you. Until one person's fight became everyone's fight. Until the impossible became possible because enough people decided it was worth making it so. The valley would remember her story. The widow who wouldn't sell. The woman who faced down Colton Vane with nothing but stubbornness and certified documents. The rancher who taught a territory that power didn't always win, that the law still mattered, and that sometimes one person refusing to quit was enough to change everything. But Evelyn didn't care about being remembered. She cared about the ranch behind her, the man beside her, and the life she was finally free to live without fear. She finished her coffee, stood up with Silas, and walked inside to the home they were building together. Tomorrow would bring work and challenges and all the normal difficulties of ranching in Idaho Territory. But that was tomorrow. Tonight there was just peace, hard-won and precious, in the space between what was lost and what was found. And that was enough.